This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times, no matter when.
Looks like people are on a spring break. Uh, and two announcements. One is, in view of the fact that I came here last week and found it very, very empty, and some of you did too, I heard, and it's my failure for not mentioning that we weren't having class last week. Some of you knew anyway, you're much smarter than I am. But we are going to have a makeup session. So we're going to extend to June 9th. So 2 more Thursdays after today. If you want to come, I'll have plenty of material to share. I wouldn't want to cut anything down. And so we meet today, and then next week, same time and place, and the following week. So we have 2 more sessions after today. Isn't that right, Carla? Yes. Okay, good. All right. Now, just for your information, if you're interested, I have a space, maybe 2, on a Berlin and Munich trip in August, the last half of August.
I'll jump in the suitcase.
Yeah. It's basically a museum trip, and in Munich, of course, Alte Pinakothek, Neue Pinakothek, a lot of other museums in Munich. I won't go into too much detail. In Berlin, the Museum Island, Pergamon, the Neues, the Egyptian, the Antiken Sammlungen, the Gemälde Gallery, etc., etc., etc. So it's a real museum trip. I think we're also stopping off at the fantasy castle of Mad Ludwig II, Neuschwanstein. For a day trip too. But anyway, if you're interested, I have little flyers, and we're staying at the leading hotel of the world, Hotel de Rome in Berlin, right next to the Opera House. And in Munich, we're staying at the Munich München Palaz. They're both 5-star hotels. But anyway, if you're interested, please let me know. And I'll put this out right in front. Now, quite a few of you ask frequently about trips. That may be too late of notice, but we have a space that opened up. Now, we looked last week at a very tough topic, and I hope I didn't sensationalize it. The debate rages about Baalism versus Yahwehism, about human sacrifice, etc. And we also have to remember that the Romans were very much looking for propaganda to bring down Carthage. So they probably hyped up a lot of energy in that regard. But I think always we balance texts with archaeology. I find that to be sensible. Remember, Samuel Johnson said, the only history we have is that written in books. And that's frankly outdated. As much as I love that lexicographer, and don't you love reading his 1755 Dictionary of the English Language? Almost every entry is ironic or humorous. You should have it. If you don't, go look it up. But it's not true. There is material history as well as textual history. And in the case of the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, the Carthaginians, they left ample evidence of practices that were scary. And people have, as I said last week, people have argued, well, this violent God of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew Scriptures, this violent God who says, destroy people. As I mentioned, I just want to verify again, emphasize, iterate, that after that passage in Deuteronomy 7, the dialogue continues about don't intermarry with them, etc., 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 which may sound like eugenics, but on the other hand, it was the way I think a mother bear protects her cubs. keeps them away from influences. And the language, as I mentioned, is not kill them, but destroy that culture, send them packing. And that seems harsh enough, mind you. But the argument goes very well that while I would not claim to be a Zionist, and I find that a rankling, politicized term, on the other hand, I do have ample evidence that in the late 19th century, under Herzog and many others, Jews were buying up a lot of property in Palestine. Thousands of acres. And guess what? The Mufti of Jerusalem, in league with Nazi Germany, basically stole all that land from the Jews who had resettled in Palestine even before World War I. I urge you to look this up if you want. There's ample evidence for it. Of course, modern politics beside, it's a difficult situation. There's no easy answer, but there also were no people called Palestinians before the 20th century. They are displaced Arabs that Jordan didn't want, Syria didn't want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is a stalled process of trying to make peace. And frankly, I don't know if it's naive or idealistic to think that it'll ever be easily resolved. But it's fascinating when you look at the decision to build a mosque in the holiest place of Jerusalem, which was done, as you know, hundreds of years ago, and the sort of smugness, assuming that the people who lived there before don't have a right to have their own sacred place there, is befuddling. But I don't want to get into the difficulties between Palestinians and Jews. Just suffice to say that every people has a right to exist peacefully. And I wish that we could somehow make diplomatic progress. It doesn't seem to be happening. Now, getting back to the material at hand today, while we're looking at the history of the land, there's an amazing amount of archaeological evidence for this people that we call the Assyrians. And the Assyrians, mind you, there are people today who call themselves Assyrians. They're from northern Iraq, and for the most part, they're Orthodox Christians. You probably know that. They may not be the descendants of the original people called the Assyrians. They may be. It's hard to say how much of that DNA is in continuity. But the name Assyrian goes at least back to what we can say the Middle Bronze Age. At least back to around 2000 BCE. So 4,000 years. What we call the Assyrians now is probably better termed the Neo-Assyrians, because they went into a demise when Babylon, old Babylon, took over, somewhere around 1800 BCE, and they resurged in the 11th century BCE, after a hiatus of 700 or so years. And Tiglath-Pileser I, and so on, that heartland of Assyria, is even called Ashur in the book of Genesis, in a very early text. And we use this term eponymous. The name Assyria derives from the god Ashur, A-S-H-U-R, if you want to spell it that way. So you could actually say Ashurians, here instead of doubling the S. But you can find that, by the way, in Genesis 10, how long that people have been around. But the new group of Assyrians start again from about the same place on the eastern Mesopotamian side, somewhere around the Tigris River, probably the confluence of the Kosa River and the Tigris, thereabouts. And yet, if we examine this culture by its material evidence, and there's ample, we'll find that, again, if we look at how they depicted themselves, and this was a culture with great achievements, great scientific achievements, great architectural, monumental building achievements. They had very descriptive geology, hydrology, but they left a record which leads us to be inclined to think that they were a military juggernaut. And maybe some of it is propagandistic. But Assyria, Neo-Assyria as we call it, from around 1000 BCE to roughly 612 BCE when Nineveh was destroyed, the last redoubt by the Babylonians, that 400 years of the Assyrians marks one of the most dynamic, militarily formidable, intimidating culture in history. And the biblical passages talk about this too, how intimidating they were. In fact, there's a word that comes out about these ancient people, the Neo-Assyrians. The word seems to be repeated throughout that entire cultural area. The entire Mesopotamia and Levant had one word to describe the Assyrians. And let's see if it suffices today. The word is cruel. So we'll see. And roughly northern Iraq. I'm not going to contemporize this too much, but let's see where this goes. Now, the city of Nineveh was one which had disappeared from the face of the earth putatively by historians. By the Enlightenment, Voltaire, don't you love Voltaire? I absolutely adore Voltaire. I love Candide and Zadig and all of his quotes. In fact, I will tell you on the side, I've just written a little book, a play, a dialogue between Pascal and Voltaire. It takes place at the Café Procope in Paris, the oldest coffee house in Paris. But it's basically a play around Pascal's wager, which I don't want to belabor today. But I made up, literally, I invented, since I love aphorisms and maxims and verbal repart, etc., repartee, I put in about 100 new little aphorisms between Voltaire and Pascal. So I made them be the mouthpiece for some of my philosophical musings. Well, I love Voltaire. You can go to the Café Procope. You can sit by his desk. There's a bust of him there in the library, etc. You can go this. I don't know if you go to Café Procope, any of you. The food is okay, but it's the ambiance that's so good. You're right across from the Comédie Française on the Rue de Bussy area. It's a wonderful place to go, and I'm sure many of you have been there. I never go to Paris without going to Café Procope. And as much as I admire Voltaire, remember, he's an Enlightenment philosopher, a philosophe, and he said, Nineveh, it's just a figment of the biblical imagination. It doesn't exist. Well, sorry, Voltaire. Blake, mock on, Voltaire, mock on. Well, Voltaire was wrong. I hate to admit it, but he was wrong. People imagined what Nineveh might have been like. And you see these sort of wedding cake structures, imaginary Voltaire. But actually, these types of structures, and I showed you this before, when people tried to imagine the ancient world, they merely sort of multiplied what they already knew. Remember, you saw this. This is Peter Bruegel the Elder's imaginary vision of the Tower of Babel. And what is it? Well, Bruegel went to Rome in about late 1550s, so he saw the Colosseum in ruin. So that's what he did. He just extrapolated the Colosseum to be the Tower of Babel. Now, I've already shown you all these things, and I've told you these sort of things. I was very fortunate that my mentor, Professor David Stronach at Berkeley, was a protege of Sir Max Mallowan. And remember his famous wife, Dame Agatha Christie. And I already told you that joke, what she said, right? Remember? I've told it to you. I probably tell it to you every year. Remember what she said? Oh, I'm sure you remember if when I repeat it. She said, being married to an archaeologist has a double side. There's a good side and a bad side. She said, and Sir Max Mallowan was the director of the Institute of Archaeology at University College London, University of London, where I did my PhD. And I've taken out his books from the library there. And she said, well, Sir Max, my husband, he's an archaeologist in Iraq, yada, yada. Well, she didn't say yada, yada, but she said, the good side about being married to an archaeologist is the older I get, the more he loves me. I've told you that before, right? Okay. But she said there's a downside too. She said, oh, you don't know what it's like to be married to a man whose career is in ruins. But of course she went with him wherever he went and wrote about it. And my mentor, David Stronach, who excavated Nineveh in the late 1980s and 90s, David said that he used to accompany them around Basra, and she was a big woman. And when they got to the field house, I think it was Basra or something like that, it was just a mud brick house, like everything there, and the only way you could get up to the second floor, they were going to use the bottom floor for pots, for sherds, for ceramics, and they were to live up on the top floor, slightly cooler. But the only way to get up were these logs stuck in the wall. And she broke every one of them going up. And she said, I think I'll stay here for a while. You just bring things up and down to me, and I'll just, live here for a week or two. But David also had to build a special Land Rover balancing because she was very big. Anyway, so David excavated Nineveh. What is that? Okay, David excavated 1980s, late 1980s to 90, and had to flee with the Saddam Hussein kerfluffle. Maybe that's too mild a word, but anyway, David was able to excavate for 4 years there, and sadly, both good and bad, many wonderful things about the excavation. And I worked on the post-excavation materials, particularly on RAF satellite imaging and some of the archaeometric stuff. Anyway, what we have from Nineveh, even though the interrupted excavation had to basically call it quits with the war there, the Gulf War, so much came out of that, and I've been very, very fortunate to be privy to some of it. But remember what Voltaire said, there was no such thing as a real Nineveh. Well, in the mid-19th century, even early 19th century, British Anglican sort of Sunday school movement, post-Wesley and so on, before the schism and so on, the Oxford movement, you know these things, I'm sure. The British vicars loved to sort of show off their knowledge of the Bible. And everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people could quote the Bible verbatim. It was de rigueur, it was part of the culture. And this young man, Austin Henry Layard, loved archaeology as a boy, and he decided, with sort of to contradict Voltaire, that he would find Nineveh. And he did. It's a long story how he did it. But like so many British archaeologists, Henry Rawlinson among them, sometimes there's a danger. He was trained in law, became part of the Foreign Service. He only wanted to go to Iraq. He became the Baghdad appointee for the Foreign Service so he could do archaeology, even though archaeology was hardly in existence as a discipline. And he kind of went native. You can see in the picture up there, dressed in Ottoman style. But he got the Ottoman firmans, the permits, to work all over the area, which was Ottoman Empire. It wasn't called Iraq per se then. That's as you know, a 20th century invention. But the area that he surveyed, Nimrud, some of the other early explorers were finding Assyrian remains. Nimrud was one of them, but he decided, after working with Nimrud, he decided he would find, literally, Nineveh. And you can see here, he's going to write it up in the 1840s, late 1840s, early 50s. This is part of this is part of the description. Henry Rawlinson, who was the one who basically was a lion pioneer of cuneiform, a British colonel from India who'd gone to Iraq also, and a brilliant linguist, he argued that inscriptions would be of infinitely greater value than bas-reliefs. For he was certain that very soon he'd be able to decipher them completely. And this happened. Rawlinson was part of the group that deciphered cuneiform from the Besistun stone in Iran. But Layard realized that it had been the Khorsabad bas-reliefs, another Assyrian city. The bas-reliefs there from Khorsabad, which had aroused the interest of Europe that urgently needed funds, would not be raised for the finding of cuneiform inscriptions, which might take many years to decipher. Stratford Canning agreed with this. For people, he said, resembled children. They liked to look at the pictures. And I always show you pictures, but we're not children. But I always feel that pictures are the best way to augment material. So there is the mounds of Nineveh seen from a terrace of a house in Mosul. You can see across the river, and that's the Tigris River. And Mosul was at this time on the west side of the river. And this is after Layard has found it. We don't know exactly how it all happened. It might have been that looking through the souks in Mosul, this is speculative, that he found some fresh pots having been dug up, inquiring where they came from. Oh, across the river over in those mounds. The locals had the big mound, and you may recall the biblical texts of Jonah, which describe Jonah going as a prophet to Nineveh. And remember, weeping under sort of a fig tree. And trying to get them to repent. Well, the big mound, the locals said for years, centuries, the big mound, this Kuyunjik mound, the mound of Nineveh, was where the whale was buried. Because right next to it was a very small tomb of the prophet Jonas. And so the small mound was Jonah's burial mound, and the big mound was the whale. Well, Nebi Yunus, because in Islam, a lot of biblical prophets are adopted, assimilated, so Jonah became an Islamic prophet as well. So you have the tomb of Nebi Yunus, which, by the way, we now know was built directly upon the Assyrian king of kings Esarhaddon's arsenal, now destroyed by ISIS. But anyway, people have done a lot of scholarship going back to this. Gordon Waterfield's one of them. His book on Austin Henry Layard, so Layard of Nineveh. Same publisher as Layard's publisher over a century later. But Layard did publish a lot of his reliefs. And he also found plaques that had the very name Nineveh on it, which now that cuneiform could be decoded post Henry Rawlinson, it proved that he was right, that he found Nineveh. But look at some of the reliefs he published. Here. It looks like it's a colossal lion from the great entrance. This is from Nimrud. And by the way, sometimes journalists and others confuse Nimrud and Nineveh. Here's another great relief showing an entrance to a small temple. And it's pretty good. It's showing the storm god, Adad, on the right, throwing thunderbolts. That's the Assyrian Adad, A-D-A-D, and so on, with a king on the left and a monster, which looks part eagle, part lion. It's like a griffin, technically. But the material that came out of Nineveh, first by Austin Henry Layard and then by George Smith. Austin Henry Layard in the late 1840s and early 50s, and then George Smith in 1872, who was an admirer of Layard as a boy. Now this entire collection that came out of Nineveh, the archives, the Royal Assyrian Library, is in the British Museum, the bulk of it. Really over 30,000 tablets, clay tablets. And the person who curates them, I've mentioned him before, is my dear friend, Irving Finkel. And I usually take a group of people to the British Museum every year or so, and we get to hold these tablets in Irving's office or in the great tablet room. But Irving, you can see some of the tablets in the drawers there. And as I said, thousands of them, at least 30,000 in the British Museum. Now, when you look at what they've told us about Assyria, one king, Ashurbanipal, despite his cruelty, he was a paranoid king, and he always felt his priests and soothsayers were taking advantage of him. They would do a liver reading every day, some poor sheep. So they do a liver reading, and they would tell the king, looking at the lobes, here's the civic lobe, here's the royal lobe. Oops, there's a big lesion in the royal lobe. King, you better stay home today. Better not go out. So he felt they were manipulating him. And so he demanded that they teach him how to read cuneiform, which takes 20 years, mind you. But because of this, although he probably never really learned to read any better than Charlemagne, he probably got this idea to create the world's biggest library at the time. And so he sent his minions all over Mesopotamia, and since they controlled the area rather forcefully, as you'll see, he took original tablets from all over, as far south as Ur. He took Sumerian tablets. He took Sumerian tablets, that some of which were translated into Akkadian, some of which were translated into Babylonian, some of which were translated later into Elamite, or earlier into Proto-Elamite. He took all these tablets, and he would make copies and send the copies back to the regional archives and keep the originals. So we have a long record from Sumerian co-translated with Akkadian, co-translated with Neo-Sumerian, co-translated, so multiple texts written side by side. What a huge boon to understanding history. What are these texts? Well, you look at them, and it's science, medicine, religion, politics, magic, history, economy, legal justice, trade. It's everything. And some of the scientific texts and the astronomy texts are fantastic. Not that the Assyrians invented astronomy or mathematics, but there's a lot of accounting, but there are also great literary epics. The Epic of Gilgamesh, among others. This is how we can read the Hammurabi Code that's now housed at the Louvre. Maybe some of you have seen it there. All these texts, we could go back further and further because of these tablets. And they're all in the care of the British Museum. And they can be held in a hand, by the way. Now, going back to how Assyria started, the dark area in the middle is that old, as I said, eponymous, named after the god Ashur. That's the old region of Assyria. And right where the Y is, serendipitously, is where the Kosor River comes into the Tigris. And you can see the Tigris there. So that's the heartland of Neo-Assyria. It's also the heartland of Old Assyria, 1,000 years before, the Middle Bronze Age. So the three phases, the second phase, taking over all the way west to the Euphrates to Carchemish. Then the third phase, all the way to, of course, taking over Babylon, Neo-Babylon, Chaldean Babylon, going into the Zagros Mountains to the Medes, taking over right to the border of Urartu, up above today the Caucasus and Transcaucasus area, the Lake Van Plateau, today going practically to the border of Iran and to the border of today Turkey. But that mountainous border was kind of a barrier. And then taking over Phoenicia, taking over under Sargon II, Samaria, the kingdom of Israel was taken down. Not all of Judea, but part of Judea. And then going eventually all the way to Egypt in a period of 300 years, or 350 years. Of course, 400 years is the length of that empire. It comes crashing down in 612 BCE when Nabopolassar, the resurgent king of Babylon, with the Medes and others, lays siege to Nineveh, and it comes down. Now, this area where you see Urartu on the top of the map, there's a common cognate word here, and there's a mountain named after that. What is that mountain named after that cognate Urartu? Ararat. That's my picture flying over Ararat last year when I was in the region. And you're basically here looking at the border of Iran, Turkey, and Armenia today. And that's Urartu is the same as Ararat. And the mountains, the Assyrians couldn't get over those mountains. But what they did in that 400-year period, they terrorized that whole region. So what you see here in orange, and even stretches beyond that you can see the big block here of what we call Arabia, the Nephud Desert, you don't cross. Maybe the Nabateans could with caravans, but basically this great arc and beyond, actually they got up to here, and they got down to here to Egypt eventually by 612. So now, when you think of how they did it, as I said, probably no culture in history deserves the epithet of juggernaut as much as Assyria. They were really a juggernaut. If you can just imagine everything they had. Of course they had infantry, and their infantry was divided up into many different parts. They had cavalry. They had artillery. Some would say they even kind of had, they had a navy that they took from the Phoenicians, and then they even had submariners. I'm going to joke about that. And there's the joke that their god Ashur, this airborne god, kind of with eagle wings, gave them, kind of a power over the air too. But there are two animals they identify with: the eagle and the lion. And why? Well, they're both predatory. They're both carnivores. They're both kind of scary. They both are the top of the pile in terms of their the animal kingdoms. The eagle is the top of the predatory triangle of birds, and the lion for animals. They identify with the bull too, only because it was big and powerful, but the lion was the real animal that they identified with most. And there were lots of lions around then in the Euphrates, Tigris area in the mountains. Now, the excavator, Layard, in this process of 4 or 5 years, when he excavated Nineveh, he took a very good artist with him, Cook, who imagined this is what Nineveh looked like. And it's actually very, very accurate. A walled city with crenellated walls that you can see down below, and then imposing structures, multiple stories. And on the left of the picture, this is on the Tigris River, you can see a ziggurat, a temple. Terence, yes?
Down at the Civic Center, there's a statue of Ashur holding a pet baby lion.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. As Terrence said, at the Civic Center, there's a statue of Ashurbanipal holding a baby lion. Now, that's what Cook imagined Nineveh was like. Quite accurate, actually. And Ashurbanipal is the last powerful Assyrian king. Descended from Esarhaddon, descended from Sennacherib, descended from Sargon II, and so on, all these dynasties and kings. This is today a satellite picture of what it looks like. Now, I looked at the 1950s RAF photos very closely, and Mosul had not encroached across the river yet. But now, you see that picture I showed you early on with Layard's book, this was Mosul, and now it's moved across the river and encircles the site of Nineveh. That's Sennacherib's walled city of Nineveh. And the Kosa River came down, and Sennacherib had even made moats for it to come out here. Part of it flowed through the city. There was a water gate here, but it also surrounded the city with moats. There was a big dam up here as well, quite outside the area. So this is the mound right there of Kuyunjik. Do you see it? You can see the relief of the mound right there. Stephanie Dolly, Oxford University Press, has put out a great book about the Hanging Gardens of Nineveh, not Babylon. You should read it. She just stayed with us a few months ago when she spoke for us at Stanford. Now that little mound right there was the mound that was Esarhaddon's arsenal that then became the tomb of Nebi Yunus, the prophet Jonah. And this was blown up, as you know, last year by ISIS. And they've also destroyed everything else they could get their hands on. But there is the Tigris River flowing this way to the southeast, and the Kosa River comes in here and flows into it there, but it was also remoted and redirected out here. So Mosul today, if you look at it, Mosul has taken over ancient Nineveh. Just a few bits that are still left untouched. And of course the mound itself had 3 palaces on it and temples, and also had ziggurats. Now, some of these Assyrians, when you look at them, this is Tiglath-Pileser III. When we were in grad school, we called him Tiggy Piggy III, just for fun. But what do you see? This is an Assyrian portrait of an Assyrian. What stands out? The beard. The hair. It's coiled, braided. It's very clear what the Assyrians value. Now this is sort of a felt precursor of the fez. But look at this. He's got an amulet in his ear, and the eye is slightly, not just facing forward, the eye is also facing slightly out, so that the Assyrian here can't be looked at without seeing what's looking at him. Do you see that? That would be bad magic if he couldn't see what saw him. So the iris and pupil kind of look out here as well as that way. Now, look at that. These were a hirsute people, very hairy, but you can't have a beard longer than the king. If you do, you won't have your head on very long. They're very proud of those beards. It's the definition of masculinity. It is macho, and they were very macho. Now, Layard, when he started excavating Nineveh, intriguingly, he found these gate gods that used to be called, a century ago, Lamasu. Now we know the better word is Alad Lamu. But they're guardian gate gods. They're hybrid. And what Layard did was he found these and realized this was a gate, so he said, well, this is a gate, let's excavate in. That's exactly what they did. You can see the burnt walls, burnt brick here. The rest is rubble and mud. This is from the destruction of Nineveh in 612 by the Babylonians and Medians and others. So these are some of the local workers taking a break, I guess. Here you can see Tisroc or Nisroch, and you can see kings, and these gate guardians are lions with eagle wings with human heads and double or treble horns and really long beards. So Layard, dangerously of course, excavated right through that mound from those gates. Some of these tunnels collapsed, and no doubt workers suffocated. But you can see the reliefs. Layard found the reliefs of all these walls. Technically, you could say if you added up all the reliefs together from every passageway in Nineveh, it might come up to a couple miles in length. And most of them are in the British Museum. I'm sure you've seen them there. Some of them were destroyed. That's actually one of his tunnels that's left right there, with treble walls. You can see different walls here, and that's one of his tunnels. And that's from David Stronach's excavation from 1990. Here's a picture of Layard drawing reliefs and writing down inscriptions in one of those tunnels. And then, of course, they basically, using good leverage and pulleys and whatever, a lot of people, a lot of human power, they took a lot of this stuff away. So here are these gate guardians being taken away. This is mud rubble above. And so these are being taken off. You see the gate guardians being taken off where? To the British Museum. Here's the London Illustrated News of 1852 showing them being taken into the British Museum. Not easy. It says Nineveh here, but then it says Nimrud there, so the journalist didn't quite get it right. Although some Nimrud stuff did go, but Nimrod is often spelled the French way, Nimrud, Nimrud, and a lot of that stuff, of course, is in the Louvre, but not as much as the British Museum has. Now, here is one of Layard's reliefs. Now, he did work at Nimrud too before he worked at Nineveh. Nimrud was found first, but Nineveh was the famous biblical city. That's why Layard was really wanting to find it. Same kind of process with stelae and wreaths. That one today, that relief, is actually now at the British Museum too. Now, interestingly, this is a bit of a problem. I want to show you this passage. It's been hotly debated. This is quoted in the book, the Layard book by Gordon Waterfield. This is an anecdote only, so we don't really know if it's true. But they told Layard, write a whopper with lots of plates. Fish up old legends and anecdotes. And if by any means you can humbug people into the belief that you've established any points in the Bible, you are a made man. But this is under a lot of debate. Waterfield says this anecdote was circulating, but he can't prove that it was actually said. It seems to be more of a 20th century idea. Now, that's not to say there weren't skeptics in the 19th century, but I'm just saying we don't know if this is true. It's an anecdote written down, but not early, written down late. Whether it's true or not, is it true? Yeah. I mean, it's true in one sense, isn't it, right? But is it true? Well, we don't know if this was really said. But here's the book that Layard published, Nineveh and Its Remains by Austin Henry Layard. Notice 1848, John Murray. Funnily enough, ironically enough, when Heinrich Schliemann excavated Troy, same title, Troy and Its Remains by John Murray and Sons, 20 years later. So anyway, you can see one of these Aladlamu gate guardians. It's probably the first time that archaeology as a discipline has a published report like this. Probably a first. Here are some of these gate gods. They go everywhere. The Met, the Louvre, the British Museum. You've seen them, I'm sure. Here's one from the Corsagad gate god at British Museum, London. Now this one has bull feet instead of lion feet, but otherwise the same. This is a lion one from the Met Museum in New York. Alad Lamu is probably the better word. The old word was Lamassu. By the way, some of the guards played games down here. You have the little scratches where they were playing games, like sort of like the royal game of Ur. Now here's one of these guardians. They're hybrids, yes? Lion, king of beasts, be it bull or lion. Eagle, king of beasts in the air. And then human. So it has a human mind, a human brain. And by the way, what's scarier, to have a bull head on a human body or a human head on a bull body? You can see where the Minotaur story came from as well. The word tar, Minotaur, is not a Greek word. Tar is a Semitic word. Tar. So the story came from the Near East. Anyway, here's Nisroch or Tisroch. Eagle head. That's kind of scary to have an eagle brain on a human body. Anyway, now interesting, Irving Finkel and I joke about this. We think C.S. Lewis's Tosh, the god of the Calormenes in the Narnia Chronicles, came from this because C.S. Lewis went to the British Museum. I don't know if you know that story about Tosh, the god of the Calormenes. He looked just like this in C.S. Lewis texts. Anyway, it's the same idea as a jinn. Now, what's a jinn? D-J-I-N-N is an Arabic word, pre-Islamic magic, pre-Islamic stories. What's a jinn? It's a genie, yes? And not that you dream of genie either, but the word genie comes from the Latin genius, G-E-N-I-U-S, which is the same Proto-Indo-European root word as jinn. If you look at it, you can see it's the same word. What is it? It's this tutelary spirit with great power. But be careful, because it can have a flip side that may be a little bit ironic or scary. Whatever the case, this is an early form of a jinn. Now, as I said, the Assyrians identified with what animal most? The lion, the eagle and the lion. And they went lion hunting all the time. And they trapped lions, and then the king turned them into pincushions. I mean, they loved lions, but they also hunted them. They wanted to be considered powerful like lions. So here's some of their art about lions. And by the way, there are hundreds of these skewered lions. I won't show you all of them. I'm just going to show you two. They're in the British Museum. You've got lions turned every which way with arrows protruding from them. It's pretty messy. I go in there quite often, usually before lunch, and I watch the school children. And then hear the teacher say, well, we wouldn't allow that today. But some of these are pretty excruciatingly poignant. And remember, this is on what's called Mosul marble, but it's alabaster. It's sort of a gypsum. It's soft stone. You're looking at reliefs that are only, at most, an inch thick, an inch deep. Do the Assyrians carve pain well? That's a very famous relief of the lioness whose spinal cord has been severed, dragging her feet behind her. And look at the pain. Look at her anguish on her face. The Assyrians depict anguish more graphically than any culture I have ever seen. Now, here's another one of a lioness at the throat of a Nubian or African. Now, of course, this is the way. Some commentators, you wouldn't believe, art historians have said, this almost looks kind of sadomasochistically erotic. But this is the way lions take down their prey, by the jugular. Now, it's very beautifully decorated around with nice enamel things. This isn't the only aesthetic that the Assyrians have. They depict flowers very nicely too. But this is by far the bulk of what they depict is cruelty. Now, if you don't believe me, this is their material. They did this. Here, speaking of their juggernaut, you can look at their depictions of their armies, but here they are holding severed heads. You see the heads they're holding? There's a severed head. Here's a severed head. They look kind of small. They may be even children's heads. They're known for intimidation. And the Assyrians, when they demand tribute and you pay up for so long and then you stop paying, they're going to come and get it. And the longer that you make them wait outside their gates, the more severe their punishment's going to be. We know this. This is on record, what they say even themselves. They may have even played games, like using heads as bowling balls under the gates and walls of the people they were besieging. So here is showing slaves being whipped. This is from the biblical prophet Nahum. We're going to come back to this. The crack of whips, the clank of chains will never depart from him. I'm going to give you the fuller passage soon. But every culture they took over, they destroyed that culture and deported the people. Anomy. They separated husband from wife. If you were under 5, they slit your throat because you wouldn't make the long march back. If you were over 50, they slit your throat because why waste food on people who aren't going to make it? I'm serious. This is their practice. Here is an Assyrian military camp picture. It's not to scale, but I'll show you this again later. You can see a little bit of the tent there, different military tents, etc. But here is one of the kings. This is Ashurbanipal, the king who made the library. There he is. Look at that beard and hair. So it seems to be quiet out there. Should we take our break now? Let's do that. Let's take our break. Quick break. So this picture that you see from the British Museum, I took it recently. I usually go to the British Museum every few months, and I was just there again in April. And notice again where all the detail is on this king. And no, that is not a Swatch watch. That's a lucky charm. That's an amulet that he's wearing on both wrists. But look at the hair. Braided, oiled, coiled, brushed. Everything. I mean, all the detail. If you look at the density of detail, it's always the beard and the hair. But look what he says. This is what Ashurbanipal says, the same man who built that great library. So this is the flip side. This is what the Assyrians said about themselves. Are you ready for it? Brace yourself. Their dismembered bodies I fed to the dogs, swine, wolves, and eagles, to the birds of heaven, the fish of the deep. What was left of the feasts of the dogs and swine of their members that blocked the streets and filled the squares, I ordered them to remove from Babylon, Cuthis, the apartment, to cast them upon heaps. Others I pierced their lips and took them to Syria as a spectacle for the people of my land. This is from their own records. If you know the Oriental Institute of Chicago, I'm not sure if that's supposed to be a then or them. I think it's better them. But anyway, Luckenbill is one of the famous translators of the Assyrian cuneiform. You can read this for yourself if you want the reference. He's not the only one by any stretch. He's just the last one to boast like this. Here is the famous Shalmaneser III obelisk. I guess I took that this year also. That's one side, and the other side shows the Omride's successor, Jehu, bowing before Shalmaneser III. And it literally says in the text right beneath it, so the king is here. This is Shalmaneser III. This is roughly the middle of the 9th century BCE. Look at his beard. Now that's a eunuch, and that's a eunuch, and that's a eunuch. So they don't have beards. But look at this is the way that Jehu is shown, with that sort of Phrygian-like cap and the short beard, bowing down, literally kissing the ground at the feet of the king. One of the phrases you often hear in Mesopotamia is, "I put my foot upon the neck of my enemy." That's a boast that's often coming out of Assyria. But that's not the son of Omri, because Ahab was the son of Omri. So the Assyrians didn't quite get it right. Jehu was the successor to Ahab, son of Omri. Took over in Jerusalem. You may know that from the texts, Jehu had Jezebel thrown out from the second floor onto the ground, and the dogs came and licked up her blood. That's a nice biblical parallel. But here is another Assyrian king, about the same time period, Ashurnasirpal. We called him Ashurnasty-Pal. And you'll see why. When you look at these reliefs of how the Assyrians treat people who resist, flaying and skinning captured victims. Ashurnasirpal said that when he came into a city, if they made him wait too long and didn't open the gates, and he had to sit out there and finally besiege it and took it down, Ashurnasirpal said, "I took the king and queen and their children. I made the children lie down in front of me in view of their parents, the king and queen, and I took a sharp stake and I popped out their eyes. And then I led the parents away with a bronze hook in their tongue," which of course shredded very quickly. This is typical Assyrian stuff. They took live people and impaled them on stakes. Literally, they made them lie down, took a sharpened pine, and shoved it up inside their bodies, and then while that's there, lifted up and whammed the stake down so the body would pull down further onto it. And if they wouldn't last long like that, would they? So, like I said, if this art is in any way realistic, what describes this culture better than the word cruel? This has been the term that is said about them by everybody around them for hundreds of years. Cruel. And if it's propagandistic and it's meant to intimidate, you can imagine if you're a vassal king being dragged through all these reliefs. Oh, there's what happened to, my grandfather. Or, oh, there's what happened to my neighboring king over there. You'd pay up, wouldn't you, pretty quickly. So, juggernaut. We have so many depictions of their juggernaut. Here's an artillery wagon with a battering ram. Covered artillery wagon battering down a wall. Do you see the defenders shooting at the enemies? But looks like the Assyrians are getting into the city very quickly. Here's another depiction of archers. And notice there's the arrow carrier, there's shields, there's a eunuch behind who's probably some kind of observer. Here are the chariots. So cavalry and chariots. Now, this is from Osprey Publishing at Oxford. I don't know if you know Osprey Texts, Military History. I've reviewed some of their books by their request, and they're really good. These are basically modern artists who just take their reliefs and then turn it into paintings. Here at the Louvre, showing scale, there are two Aladlamu facing slightly different direction. Look at the woman, and that woman, when I took the picture, she's actually 5'10". So she's a tall woman. And then you can see on the left, it's actually Gilgamesh holding the baby lion. Or the lion is not a baby, it's a full-grown lion, but he's a giant. And you can imagine, the lion sort of scratching down its chest, and Gilgamesh doesn't even feel it. So who's mightier than the lion? Gilgamesh. Look at the beard. This from Khorsabad, Dar Shur-Keen. Now, these are Assyrian archers. There's another battering ram, same one I actually showed you before. Very tough to break through that battering ram. The battering ram itself is artillery. This is the precursor to a Sherman tank, isn't it? Right? Here are their slingshot bearers. So kind of archers, slingers, whatever, a lot of people getting their throats slit down below. Look at the people impaled on, you see people impaled on up in the middle part, impaled on poles. Here's another, these are Assyrian cavalry, so not chariots, now just cavalry. You see it all with Assyrian juggernaut military. This is a Phoenician ship that's been commandeered by the Assyrians. So they've got a navy too. So you can go on and on about how we depict them based on their own art. There's an Assyrian iron helmet in the British Museum. This is in the Lachish room. Those are slingshot balls from Lachish, from their slingshots. Literally been recovered from Lachish. David Ushushkin, who excavated at Lachish, this is one of the cities that Sennacherib took. He says in his Taylor Prism at the British Museum, I took 46 fortified cities of Judah. But he didn't take Jerusalem. He said, I shut up Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. But he didn't take it. But boy, did he take Lachish. So here are more slingers. They're submariners. That's supposed to say under. It's missing an E. I can fix that if you don't mind. I hate seeing those little metatheses typos. There. Are you happy? I am. Okay, so now, the way that they took water gates was they either shut off the river higher up and then went under the grill, under the portcullis, and they used pig bladders if it was too far a distance. They took inflated pig bladders and they sucked the air from the pig bladders, making sure the pig bladders weren't too buoyant, because then it would be harder to get under those gates. So these are sappers. So I say jokingly, submariners. Now, this is the plan of Nineveh from basically the time of Sennacherib. And as I said, he canalized the water and brought it down. There was the Elijah Dam. It's not right here. It's much further up, about 5 miles away. And he canalized it to protect the city. These are the different gates. Some say there are 15 gates. Some say they were smaller gates, like postern gates. But 15 or so gates. And they're named after the gods, for the most part. The moon god Sin, Nergal. The storm god Adad. Not every gate is named after a god. Shamash, the sun god. Ashur, the primary god of Assyria, facing to the south. And so here's the big mound of Kuyunjik, where the palaces were. Here's the smaller mound, which was the arsenal of Esarhaddon, the son of Sennacherib. And that then became the tomb of the prophet Jonah, so they say. Or the Islamicized prophet Jonah, Nebi Yunus. If you know Arabic, Nebi is the Arabic form in Hebrew of Nabi, prophet. Anyway, all the different gates. Now the river did go through the town. That was its natural course. So there were very difficult and heavy water gates here, both sides. These were the palaces. Sennacherib's palace down here, the king from the late 8th century BCE, and then 2 successors down, after Esarhaddon, the son of Esarhaddon, Ashurbanipal, his palace here. Both of them turned out enormous archives. That's why the British Museum has the 30,000 library tablets. And then the Ishtar temple, the Nabu temple, and these are basically, the Nabu temple is a huge ziggurat. And these are what the crenellated walls looked like a few years ago. A big city. Now on the mound, here are the palaces. So there's the Sennacherib palace. There's the Ashurbanipal palace. You can see the thick walls there. That tells you have a tall structure. That's the ziggurat there, and so on. And one of the archives was found here. Another one was found here. Now look at all these passageways. Here's now a blow-up of this. This is Sennacherib's palace. And notice the scale. That's 600 meters there. So that's a pretty big palace, isn't it? 600 meters. I mean, that's what? Not quite half a mile, but pretty big. And you can imagine all these reliefs covered all these internal rooms and passageways. Now the big open passageways were not roofed. Those were courtyards. You couldn't have timber big enough to span that. But a lot of passageways and the great processional way and those gates that had the Lamassu, or Alad Lamu. Now here again, I showed you this relief of this Assyrian military camp. Some artists are really good at copying this idea. So if you think of a story about Assyrians and an Assyrian king named Holofernes, Gustav Klimt copied that, you see. There it is. There's his Judith with Holofernes' head. A little, shall we say, risque. He's suggesting what about Judith? Well, that she compromised her virtue to take off the head of the king, to get him exhausted, but whatever. Now, here's what Nahum says. This is what you call a kinah, a lament. It's woe to the city of blood. It's literally Nineveh. Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims, the crack of whips, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses, jolting chariots, charging cavalry, flashing swords, glittering spears, many casualties, piles of dead, bodies without number, people stumbling over corpses. When you read this in Hebrew, it's almost breathless. Boom, boom, boom. Very onomatopoeic, very harsh in its sound. So it's a poem about the fall of Nineveh. It's a poem about why Nineveh is going to fall. It's a violent city. The city of blood. Now, here is when Sennacherib went to Judah. Israel, the northern kingdom, had already fallen. 725 to 720, Sargon II's coming down from the north. A lot of people in Israel, the northern kingdom, fled south to the kingdom of Judah. The population of Jerusalem probably quadrupled with refugees from the north. They were the same people, but they had separated two kingdoms since Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. So the northern kingdom, Israel, the southern kingdom, Judah, people say, where'd the lost 10 tribes go? Well, Jerusalem was filled up with these refugees, and the ones that didn't make it to Jerusalem were taken off into captivity and disappeared. They were assimilated into whatever deported peoples Assyria took. But now here, these are biblical passages, and I want you to look at them carefully. This is from 2 Kings 20:20. And the rest of the acts of Hezekiah and all his might, and how he made a pool and a conduit, brought water into the city, are they not written in the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Which technically are 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Here in 2nd Chronicles, when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib was come, literally was taking the cities of Judah, and that he was purposed to fight against Jerusalem, Hezekiah took counsel with his princes and his mighty men to stop the waters of the fountains which were outside the city, and they did help him. So there was gathered much people together who stopped all the fountains and the brook that ran through the midst of the land, saying, why should the king of Assyria come, the kings of Assyria come and find much water? What do you do when you have an invading army? You basically fill all the wells with rocks. You stop up all the water so that these people who are invading have no water to drink. Makes sense, doesn't it? But you have to redirect your own urban water so it's not outside the city. This makes total sense. Then this same Hezekiah also stopped the upper water course of Gihon. Remember, that means intermittent, gusher. It comes, goes, comes, goes. I think some of you have crawled through it, yes? Who else here has been through it? Somebody? Yes. You've been through it. It's 1,764 feet long, and it's not easy to get through. You can walk through it, but you have to wait for it to abate. Otherwise, what happens is it comes up to your neck. And when I did it, I don't think you can even do it today. Maybe you can, but I've heard it's not so easy to do because it goes through a lot of Palestinian territory. Anyway, in East Jerusalem. So he shut up the upper water course of Gihon, brought it straight down to the west side of the city of David. And Hezekiah prospered on his works. And then here's from Isaiah, speaking to Hezekiah. By the way, Isaiah, if there's historicity to the text, whether it's 1st Isaiah, 2nd Isaiah, 3rd Isaiah, the Dead Sea Scrolls has the entire book, as you know, from at least 150 BCE. But it says, you Hezekiah saw, the city of David was broken through in many places. Now this part, you counted the buildings in Jerusalem and tore down houses to strengthen the wall. We'll come to that in a minute. In other words, you need to build the wall up, and their houses from these new housing tracts that have sprung up in the 20 years the refugees have come. 725 to 720 is Sargon II, the father of Sennacherib, coming. Sargon II died of plague. We think cholera. Now, his son Sennacherib, 20 years later, follows his father's invasion route south, west and south. So Sargon II got as far as Samaria, Israel, and Sennacherib comes 20 years later, 705. And now Jerusalem has quadrupled from the refugees from the north, from Samaria and Israel. So Hezekiah's got to think, what am I going to do to protect my city? Well, I've got to redirect my water. I can't let water be flowing outside the city for these Assyrians. I've got to redirect that spring to come back inside the city. So he dug a tunnel. His engineers dug a tunnel. They met in the middle. They followed fissures in the Cenomannian limestone of Jerusalem's rocky plateau. And then, if you're looking at these new houses that have sprung up, well, some of them got to go down because that's where we have to put the wall. It's exactly what they did. Now, here is, so I showed you this last week. There was the Hinnom Valley. Remember the place where Hezekiah's son Manasseh burned his own children? If that's true story. And it became the trash dump. But right here is the city of David. What happened under Hezekiah with the refugees? The city grew to a much, notice this says, extension by Hezekiah. The city quadrupled at least in its population. I'm not sure that extension is totally accurate, but we do know that there are a lot of new houses that are built in that 20-year period. And we know exactly the house plan. You know, if you look at house plans, you can date the tract. Did you know that? That's true in antiquity too. I'll show you in a minute how this works. So what Hezekiah did, this was the Gihon Spring, and it flowed mostly down into the Kidron Valley. So he blocked it off and brought it inside. Do you see that? Brought it inside the city. So it was now coming through the rock. Here's another view of it. There's the Gihon Spring, and it's deep under the city. Deep under the city, right in here. And you can follow it. I've come in from this spot here. It's a locked gate, and as I said, I don't know if it's accessible now. And then you come out through here to the Siloam or Siloam pool, which is now extended greatly, and I'll show you more of that in the coming weeks. Now, the inscription, this is the literal inscription found in the tunnel. It's now in the Israel Museum. And everything's right. The language, the letter shapes, everything is right. And this is what it says that you can see. Let me just go back for the people who didn't hear. This is literally the description of what this says right there. It's not complete. There's the tunnel, and as I said, some of you have also agreed you've been through this. Anybody? Just raise your hand. Yeah. Do you remember, did you do it with a flashlight, Sigrid? Didn't need a flashlight? Well, when I did it in 1984, it was totally dark. Okay. Was it lit for you all? No, you did it in the dark too? Yeah, I did it in the dark, which was really fun. Splash, splash, splash. Anyway, now remember the wall that Hezekiah built? Tore down houses to build up the wall. Since Jerusalem had expanded a considerable portion, there's the end of the conduit, so he had to dig this wall down. He built a wall. This is where there were literally houses down here. So he had to build a new wall. And here, if we look at, there is exactly the wall. That's the wall. These houses were houses built between 725 to 715 BCE. And we know it because of the pottery found inside. And the burnt remains radiocarbon dated. The house styles, it's the famous two and a half room house. The same potsherds found in the house were also found in the construction of the wall. So we know exactly when that wall was built. So this is what Avigad, the Israeli archaeologist, found. Houses torn down to build the wall. I mean, talk about an archaeological triumph. Now, Hezekiah's tunnel is exactly what Second Chronicles says it was. The new wall is exactly what Hezekiah built, even in a book which seems to be poetic like Isaiah. So what happened? Sennacherib did not take Jerusalem. He says, I shut up Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. But he never claims to have taken the city. So he leaves. Why? Suddenly, now the text says an angel of the Lord came down and struck, 80,000 people that night dead? So you have Reuben's picture of the angel of the Lord coming. Now, I'm not trying to take away from the force of this, but think about it. Sargon II died of cholera. His army still had residual infection. Even 20 years later, cholera is an issue. How fast can you die of cholera?
24 hours.
Or less. Or less.
Well, that's if you're young and healthy.
If you're young and healthy, 24 hours. A lot of evidence has come out from China and some of the cholera epidemics that cholera vibrio, the bacterium, the bacillus, can take you in 7 hours if you're drinking fecally infected water. All that little bacillum needs to do is to multiply in your body in a nice warm environment, and you suffer massive, massive diarrhea if you don't get hydrolytes replaced. I'll leave it to you who are doctors, but the minimum time that you would need to die, to be totally dehydrated and die, is 6 to 7 hours. So it's intriguing. This may be what happened. Sennacherib turned around and left. Yes, Dr. Dito. Yeah.
We were taught in medical school they died of dehydration. We were taught in medical school it died of dehydration. And so when my son caught it in Egypt, because they told us not to drink the water, but he didn't believe me. He was going to toughen up his gut. And he got sicker than I have ever seen anybody. He was losing water from both ends every 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And when I got back, I told our infectious disease doctor, I don't imagine you can tell me what kind of diarrhea he had. And he said, tell me. When I told him, he said he had cholera. He said, do you know what they die of? And I said, dehydration. No, what? Kidney failure.
So renal failure, yeah.
Yep. And stroke. From the dehydration, the blood thickens up, the red blood cells block the blood vessels, and they have a stroke and die. And they die, as you say, in hours. And after seeing him, I could believe it.
Yeah, so dehydration may be the cause, but it may not be the actual agent of death. Terrence, and then we have to move on quickly.
Even as late as the Crimean War and the American Civil War, more men died of camp diseases.
Yeah. That's been true through history. That if you look at military history, more people die by septicity and disease than actual wound. So we know that's true. In the 20th century, there's a lot of record of cholera taking people out in a third of a day, completely. So what's the difference between dead and debilitated? And anyway, Sennacherib left. And wouldn't it make sense if you block up every accessible water in the land? You fill all the wells with stones. You block off the water source. There's no good water to drink. Somebody infected the water source. They all drank the water. It's like drinking the Kool-Aid, isn't it? Anyway, Sennacherib left, mission incomplete. So what happened? Sennacherib went back to Nineveh. And we have a story what happened. We know what happened. The Assyrian record says his own sons rebelled against him. His son Esarhaddon rose up against him and struck him down. And we have this in the British Museum, this relief of Sennacherib's face chopped out of his picture by his sons, by Esarhaddon and others. So it's an amazing story, and seems to be both archaeologically and textually the same. That this is what happened to Sennacherib, what happened to the Assyrians. And Hezekiah did the right thing. He may have not been the best model of a dad, but he also did something else that was a bit foolish. He showed the Babylonians his wealth, and they came to get it a few generations later, a century later. But here's what Nineveh looks like. I'm just going to finish up. This is part of the city. This is looking from the north on the mound of Kiyunjik, and this is part of the walls. It's left. That's modern reconstruction of one of the gates. That's a modernly reconstructed Mashki gate, which was on the north east side. Crenellated walls. There's the Shamash gate on the east side to the sun god. There it is, looking north. Here's the Shamash gate. Now, here's what Nahum says again. This is now the Babylonians in league with Cyaxares, the Medians. They get together to overthrow Nineveh, to overthrow the Assyrians, but this is now a century later. By that time, Nineveh has reached the limits of what's possible. They're no longer reaping a lot of benefits from loot and booty because they've conquered everybody. And Nineveh now is going to go down, finally, to everyone's delight. An attacker advances against you, Nineveh. Guard the fortress, watch the road, brace yourselves, marshal all your strength. The Lord will restore the splendor of Jacob like the splendor of Israel, though destroyers have laid them waste and have ruined their vines. The shields of the soldiers are red, the warriors are clad in scarlet, the metal in the chariots flashes. On the day they are made ready, the spears of juniper are brandished. The chariot storms through the streets, rushing back and forth through the squares. They look like flaming torches. They dart about like lightning. Nineveh summons her picked troops, yet they stumble on their way. They dash the city wall. The protective shield is put in place. Now remember how Nineveh saw itself was the lioness. Yes, the lion? Yes? Notice, the river gates are thrown open, the palace collapses. It is decreed that Nineveh be exiled and carried away, just like they've done everybody else. Her female slaves moan like doves and beat on their breasts. Nineveh is like a pool whose waters drain. Stop, stop, they cry, but no one turns back. Plunder the silver, plunder the gold. The supply is endless, the wealth from all its treasures. She is pillaged, plundered, stripped. Hearts melt, knees give way, bodies tremble. Every face grows pale. Where now is the lion's den? That's what Nineveh was called, the lion's den. Where now is the lion's den, the place where they fed their young, where the lion and lioness went, and the cubs with nothing to fear. The lion killed enough for his cubs and strangled the prey for his mate, filling his lairs with the kill and his dens with the prey. But this idea, where now is the lion's den? Now the Babylonians came. This is the Babylonian king Nabopolassar, who got together with Cyaxares. This is probably Nabopolassar on the left. This is an artistic reconstruction on the right. This is the cylinder of Nabopolassar, the British Museum. Here's now Cyaxares of Media, his ally. They got together, the Medes and the Babylonians, and overthrew Nineveh. But this is, as I said, a century later. This is 612. Now, interesting, Cyaxares' daughter, who's the king of the Persians, the Medians, not really the Persians, but they're eventually become the Persians, when connected with the Persians, like Cyrus, the daughter of Cyaxares, Amytis, marries Nebuchadnezzar. So there's an alliance made between the Medians and the Babylonians. So Nebuchadnezzar, we're going to talk about more next week. Here are, amongst the warriors were Scythians, the attackers. So the alliance of the Babylonians, Medians, and Scythians against Nineveh. So Nabopolassar on the left, and Cyaxares is one of these two. It's hard to say if that's a Scythian chieftain king on the right. But look here's the Babylonian Chronicle. In the 14th year of the reign of King Nabopolassar. 612. So the king of Babylon mustered his army, marched to the king of the Medes, marched towards the king of Babylonia. They met one another, the king of Babylonia and Coxares, brought across, they marched along the bank of the Tigris. They encamped against Nineveh from the month Shimanu, June, till the month Abu, August. For 3 months they subjected the city to a heavy siege. On the day of the month Abu, they inflicted a major defeat upon a great people. At that time, the last king of Assyria, Shin-Sharishkun, king of Assyria, died. Great quantities of spoil from the city and the temple beyond counting turned the city into a ruin heap. Somebody from Assyria escaped from the enemy, and so on. That's literally a 1923. It was published, but that's Babylonian Chronicle 21.901. Literally, it's telling about the fall of Nineveh. Now, there's my map of Nineveh with the allies coming to the gates. They came 3 places. They came to the Adad gate, they came to the Halsey gate, and they broke through the water gate. This is even in Diodorus Siculus. So there's the Adad gate, and you can see the Adad gate way up here in the north. This is the northeast corner of the city. Okay, there is part of the wall along the south of the Kosar. Literally, this is all mud brick that melted above it. Just rain eventually does that. You can see close-ups of this. So that's in my book, When Empires Clash. And this shows the Babylonian and Median allies coming there, and then their real breakthrough into the city is there. Now, defenders from Nineveh, we have bodies both at the Adad gate and the Halsey gate. So there's the Kosar River now. I'm just going to go through this. You can see the Kosar River through part of the retaining wall. There's the Kunjik Mound. This is the east end, not too far from where Stephanie Dalley puts the Hanging Gardens. This is the Nebi Yunus fragments of Alamassu. Today this has been blown up by ISIS. So that's the Halsey gate as it's being excavated. This is the southeastern gate. Halsey gate going down. That's David Stronach right there. Here's the excavation of the Halsey gate with these crenellations that were on the top of the wall that have fallen. Now what they did, they took the gate and they made it much smaller. They mud bricked it in so it could be much more defendable. And then the Halsey gate found at least a dozen skeleta with arrow points inside their bodies and weapons. So they were taken down. So those are the defenders of these were, well, we don't know if they're defenders or offenders, but they were taken out. So multiple skeleta, dozens of skeleta found at those 2 gates. Now, here you can see a skeleta. There you can see an iron dagger handle. There's a close-up of it. You can see the iron has oxidized. So, Nineveh went down. Now, Nineveh has gone down again by ISIS because Mosul has totally surrounded, and here they blew up part of the walls, and they also blew up the Nebi Yunus, Esarhaddon. They felt that Jonah wasn't Muslim enough a prophet. So that went down. Here's the destruction of Nebi Yunus right there. Underneath of which is the arsenal of Esarhaddon. Now, they're very, as you know about ISIS, they only destroy what they can't carry away, what they can't mobilize to sell on the illegal market of antiquities. So they take power tools to destroy the Alad Lamu that are left. There's really not much left of Nineveh. But let's go back and finish with this. The fall of Nineveh. Here's Nahum say, all who see you will flee from you and say, Nineveh is in ruins. Who will mourn for you? Where can I find anyone to comfort you? And that's a play on words because, as you know, the Hebrew verb naham means to comfort. So he's making an allusion to comfort here. Nothing can heal you. Your wound is fatal. All who hear the news about you clap their hands at your fall. For who has not felt your endless cruelty? So we end with that. Where now is the lion's den? It's a story of the Assyrians, and they basically reaped what they sowed, ultimately. What I find fascinating is how closely the biblical texts and the archaeology intersect so explicitly. And thank you for your patience with this. Next week, a little bit more of Babylon, and then we move to the New Testament. Thank you.